And welcome back. Now, Economist Mike Schussler says that government is spending 50 billion rand a month, and that's more than what it collects in taxes. He also says that the situation could worsen and possibly reach a monthly deficit of between 60 and 65 billion rand a month. Schussler also says that government's projection of a 325 billion rand budget deficit this year will actually be pushed up to more than 700 billion rand because of the COVID-19 pandemic. So in order to cover the deficit, government will either have to resort to borrowing more money, which in turn will cause an even greater burden on South Africans. Mike Schussler joins us now to discuss this further. Mike, good morning. Thanks so much for your time once more.
Pleasure. Thank you.
So, Mike, spending 50 billion rand per month. Firstly, what exactly are we spending this money on?
Well, we're spending it obviously on the COVID-19 situation, the extra money needed for the army in the streets at stages, and then the extra social grants that we put out there. That adds up to about 9-10 billion a month, the social grants alone. So it's quite a lot of spending increases from the government side to keep things going. Government is also making available loans or loan guarantees to private firms. And, they have to have some money for that. The other point is it's not just the spending, but as the lockdown and COVID-19 started hitting South Africa, people lost their jobs, firms couldn't operate. So there wasn't the cash flow there. And that meant that people weren't able to pay taxes, pay as you go. People weren't spending, so your VAT came down. And as Rob Burns has just said to you again, traffic is still far, far below levels of normal, and therefore petrol taxes are down too. And, then we all know the situation with alcohol and cigarettes, which is costing us 4 billion a month. So you add all that up and you get to 50 billion quite easily, and the whole. And it was a whole already of about 25 billion. And now it's gone to 50 billion, and it is going to at least 60 billion. It's not me saying that. That is the actual government numbers.
Usually they'd say when you're in a hole, you need to stop digging. But we seem to be digging deeper and deeper all the time, Mike. National Treasury confirming that they expect the budget deficit to be around 710 billion rand for the 2020-21 financial year. So can you just briefly break it down for us, for the ordinary citizen, what that actually means?
Well, it means, on the one hand, we have to look for 710 billion rand, but it's likely, first of all, to be a bit more, just to take a step back, because we know the tax collections are still underperforming. And we can see from other data that it looks like the government deficit will probably be in the region of 750 billion to 800 billion. That's a lot of money to go and look for, and we are finding money, like we've all heard from the IMF. We've asked the World Bank, we've asked the New Development Bank, the African Development Bank, and our own local pension fund and banks. So ultimately, we are really trying to get a lot of money together. That's the first part. The second part is obviously some of the spending will help us because collect a bit more revenue. For example, the social grant spending that the poorer communities have, that's increased with 10 billion a month, and that will continue to October. But some of that will be recollected via VAT or other taxation forms and so on. When people take a taxi, the taxi driver needs some fuel, and that is taxed. So ultimately, we're looking at a situation where the tax situation should stabilize a bit, but the problem is it's going to stabilize at very, very low numbers at first. And we're going to have to then either increase taxes, and we know that's going to be very difficult because we're already in the top 10 countries in the world with our tax burden to GDP. And the other side, we're going to have to cut spending. And that is also a very difficult part because about 40% of the spending of government is government salaries. And that's going to be a very hard issue politically to tackle. but needs to be tackled. Let's make that clear. And I think that's where, as a society, we are right now in a very, very deep hole. And we're going to have to borrow a lot more money. But that also means that our interest spending will rise to about 6, 7, and later 8% of GDP. And that's a very, very big number, because it means that 20 cents out of every rand shortly in the next 2 years is going to be spent on interest. And in about 4 years' time, probably closer to about 24, 25 cents out of every rand in taxes collected will go to interest payments.
So looking at government expenditure, Mike, and you talk about the salary bill, but successive finance ministers have said that government needs to cut down on its expenditure. But it seems to have been nothing more than talk, because we haven't actually seen real cuts in terms of government spending. So what can they practically do at this stage to actually lead by example?
Well, it's going to be very difficult, because they've promised infrastructure spending in some form or another with the private sector, and that's already very, very low. It's very difficult for government now to not buy consumables, because we need the medicines that the hospitals need and so on, and we need the books that school children need and the police uniforms and the like. So that's difficult to cut. So I suspect we will see some cuts in maybe defense, but that's already very cut. So the clearer picture is this: we have to, at the end of the day, in one way or another, cut government salaries. And that doesn't mean we physically cut them. It means that we don't increase them, and we allow inflation and the GDP to rise over time. And that would give us a sign. So we have to go to a situation where we don't give any inflation-related increases to government civil servants for a while, and also to look for departments and so on where we can cut the staff numbers actually physically. South Africa is one of the biggest salary bills in the world as a percentage of GDP, and that is clearly going to have to be addressed. And yes, it is politically very, very difficult, and the finance minister needs a lot of support, and I don't see it happening quite easily, but we are nearing a crisis. We are heading to that fiscal cliff that economists have been talking about, and it is a situation where we don't want to be, because when we get there, there will be no money for anything else but debt and salaries. There will be no medicines in the hospital. There'll be no books at school. And that means that, you're employing people just for the sake of employing them. And that is obviously not going to help us. And then the next stage after that, obviously, is where we can't even afford to pay the people that we employ. So we need to do something now, and we need to do it pretty soon. I think we'll get some answers from the October medium-term budget policy statement that the Minister of Finance, Mr. Tito Mboweni, is going to make. And I think we'll look forward to seeing a little bit more clarity or a little bit more insight into what the government is going to do. But we all know that they have to address the salary issue at some stage, and that stage is heading to us very quickly.
So, Mike, just finally, the outlook, short, medium, long term, where we headed?
Well, the short term is now we have seen a very good recovery. I'm releasing the BankServe Economic Transaction Index, BankServe Africa, and that shows a 9% increase month on month for July, which is very, very strong. It's the strongest increase that we've ever seen. But we must remember we're still about 9% under the high point that we were. And I'm very pleased to say that I think in the short term, things will look up a lot. The problem is the medium and the long term, we need to get our balances right. That is the government spending, government regulations, all those things will have to be addressed. Otherwise, we're going back into a very low growth cycle. And just to put it into context, roughly 30 years ago, South Africa was in 55th place out of about 180, 185 countries. Now we're 105th place out of roughly 205 countries. So we've now dropped below the halfway mark in a per capita income terms around the world. And that is, not somewhere where we would like to be. We would like to be certainly not just in the richer half, probably in the richer quarter of the world's population. I think that's what we've got to aim for. We've got to say to ourselves, let's get richer, if you wish, and not fall down the rankings of the world in terms of how rich and how much income we have.
Well, we have to leave it there. Thank you so much, Mike Schussler, discussing the economic forecast for us. And interesting picture, and we wait to see, but it really doesn't look good. Let's take a quick break.